company, and it's where we do a lot of the Angular. We have internet there, and we learn all the stuff that's on it, and we enjoy coming out and around in the world, talking about it more and learning from what other people are doing with it. So with that in mind, what our company does mostly is develop either brand new projects for our clients, and what we offer to them is a lot of this front-end JavaScript experience with also no back-end experience. But for technical teams that are otherwise not web-centric, we're a great fit. A great example that I like to give is the client that was able to kind of let us all be a company was a voice synthesis company. They can use digital signals processing and learning artificially to take sound files and make them into synthetic voices, and then add emotion on top of them. So they can make Siri smile. If she always sounds monotone to you, check out what they do, Euphony. They'll make her either happy or sad, or in an airplane cockpit. That is really impressive stuff. Yet, how do they deliver that over an API on the web and have a dashboard for these, brilliant team? This sort of outside their scope. So we come in and do something like that for them. Large applications and small applications we'll use Angular on. It's a factor of working on multiple different projects. It's nice to have a common language. Angular provides that in a way that we all in this audience understand. The Reacts and use start to with create React app or the use CLI, yet the absolute consistency across Angular applications makes it so nice for us to be able to jump into somebody else's project when we're augmenting their team, understand everything's in source app and it's divided into modules. All these things are really great, and we all understand that, I hope. So when we talk about Angular Universal now for today's actual subject, Angular Universal is this subsection of the Angular world for server-side rendering. The reason for server-side rendering has a lot to do with SEO. Most applications that we think about for SEO have to do with making sure that when it's shareable on Facebook, you're not rendering your curly brace templates, you're actually rendering the content. And in addition to that, you can get some performance benefits and perceived performance benefits by having a static content render before your Angular framework does. Now, that's not always necessary. We don't always use SSR. Probably you would need to consider whether it's right for you or not based on what you're actually doing. If you have a private application that only an internal team is ever going to see, it's never going to be indexed by Google. If it's got military secrets on it, it will never be shared on Facebook. Yeah, you could use SSR, but you wouldn't really be reaping the main benefits of it when you already have a strong framework that's delivering fast performance and load times and giving your users what you want. And then in addition to that, NGRX is the second part of this talk, where you would use NGRX in a case where you have a large application, you have to maintain your state consistently. And as a trade-off for being so consistent and really explicit, it has this side effect of requiring a lot of boilerplate. Now, an Angular application has its own boilerplate. NGRX is that amount of boilerplate, like, I don't know. It's like the difference between like a big rock and a boulder, you know? You really have this tremendous amount that comes along with it. So that's a real serious thing to consider before adding it to an application is just, do you need it yet? And when you have it and you have this premature optimization, you might find yourself in a situation where you added it to your project because it's, you know, on the internet and it sounds nice to use, and you just wasted a lot of time in order to make a button work or an asynchronous call. And while it was great to learn, you probably didn't solve any business need, and you're just, you know, further behind in your project with it. So these are some considerations before you even get into it. A good example where Angular Universal and NGRX is very valuable is something, a good example being genius.com. that website with the lyrics that when you click on them, they're annotated and they tell you what they are. It's absolutely the perfect spot for it. Like King Kendrick Lamar says, don't do it like he did because you ain't who he is. Make sure that when you're actually doing it, you're doing it because your need has it. Genius.com, when you go to it and load it up, the first thing you'll see is the yellow header and then the gray body in the background. That's it. And when you look at the HTML that's there, you'll see that there is the actual lyrics that you're looking for right in the HTML. Now, why is that really important to Genius? Because the only way any of us has ever been to that website is through Googling Beyonce flawless lyrics. And, oh yeah, Genius, that's nice. And then clicking on it. It's very rare to care about lyrics unless you're somebody who's in that very high user percentage. You're going to get there from the search engine. So you need to have good SEO in that situation. So with that in mind, you have your raw HTML downloaded from the server immediately. You can get the lyrics that you want, even if you're on a slow 3G connection. Some people are, some people aren't. But when you are, you really feel it, and you really get those lyrics immediately. Afterwards, the benefit of using something like Angular in Genius's case is they don't just do lyrics. Other websites did lyrics before Genius. Other sites are doing it now. And people go to Genius because of those annotations and that interactive bit. You understand that when you click on the lyric for that word you've never heard of, you can read more about it. Or when that artist makes a particular reference to their life and you're not, following them on e-news at night, you can get that reference to, oh, they were having a feud. And so this is why it is. These are the things that gives Genius its whole value. It's why Andreessen Horowitz invests $15 million into them. And when you do that type of thing, SEO matters. When you're raising money, SEO matters. When you have people who are viewing your website, SEO matters. And so in that case, yeah, you really want server-side rendering. So you take that as like a grain of salt to explore in your own world. Do you need server-side rendering? If you look a little bit like Genius in your business case, you probably do. But then to take it a step further, do you really need NGRX along with that server-side rendering? In Genius's case, they absolutely do. If you're familiar with the website, you'll know that when you click on those annotations, they load asynchronously. They're not just there. They come from the server every time you click it. It helps load the page faster. You don't need all the data, all the things that we all know make the modern web so great is that Ajax-like effect. Yet, once you click on a lyric and you get the annotation, you go to another one, and then you go back. That same one is not asynchronously loading, it's now there on state. So it's there on state, you're the user, you're going back and forth, you're having a good time reading your lyrics, you've got a little bit more knowledge that you've never needed, but so you're there and you're enjoying yourself, and then you go down to the comments, and then in the comment section, there's all this great stuff down there. You can embed a YouTube link or a GIF, and you can get the picture of the mic drop when the guy does the cool thing. And everybody who visits it, I think if they're, especially in that core user group, they're doing a lot on that website. They're liking things, they're scholars, and they're getting points, they're doing annotations themselves. All of that is state, every bit of it. It's super interactive, it's super alive when you're using it. And to track that is a nightmare if you're using dollar scope in AngularJS. Everybody's always found two-way data binding after the first year to be more or less a nightmare. It's got all this different interactive magic that brings you in and makes you feel good for a second, and then like any real, destructive substance in your life, it feels bad after a while. NGRX is that Redux pattern from the React world that did all of that good one-way data flow management. Angular came in and it gave you the same ng model as you had in AngularJS, but when you got Angular, you also got this team of Brandon Roberts and Mike Ryan making NGRX. So they let you write Redux-like code using observables and some other stuff, but it's essentially Redux-like code into your Angular app. And now you're Genius, and yeah, you're there, you're developing it, you have all this state, you got 15 million from Andreessen Horowitz, got some time to build it out, and you want it to be good, and you want it to be performance, so you use it. So when you've got a large application, and there's a lot of interactivity for a user, you should use NGRX. When you've got an application that needs to be SEO performant, or otherwise have good reasons to be shared, you would want to use SSR. And when you have both, use both. They're good use cases for that. To not use it, again, is like a private application. Definitely never use it in like a test app. Yes, it's useful to learn NGRX and maybe use like a tutorial to do it or look into the example app to understand how a reducer works. We won't go into that here. But just implement it, it's a premature optimization. There's enough that you can do without it in terms of keeping a state object on your component and just kind of faking it, that it's worthwhile for that. So with that in mind, the first thing that we wanted to do when we were looking into Universal was understand like the simplicity of it. You know, about 2 months ago, I was talking to a friend of mine at a startup who's doing a lot of React, and he's been doing React for a long time. And he likes React, and well, we're adults, you know, a framework's a framework, it has its place in the world. But I did ask, what is it like to do lazy loading in React? If you haven't done it in Angular, well, you won't realize how easy it is. And if you haven't done it in React, you won't realize how hard it is. But if you've done it in React, you've realized you've never actually completed it. This person's been doing React for 2 years, great guy. It's just really, really hard because the way that it's been implemented is through a lot of small libraries built by a lot of different people that are meant to interoperate in certain ways based on a certain way of configuring it that you're assuming your app is built the same way as its other ones, but it's generally not. So my friend never built lazy loading, and I described to him what it's like in Angular. You go into your routes and you add a hash mark, and after a second, you've done it. So it could be easier in Angular. It's possible in React theoretically. So what is it like to do server-side rendering in Angular? In React, it's not all that bad. It's pretty good. They've been able to do it at the startup. And in our little neck of the woods at an agency where we have some customers that need SEO, we wanted to know what it would be like in order to implement that for them. So the first thing Ksenia did, and she's a partner at the company who did the original code that you'll be seeing here, is look at all the tutorials and understand what to do. So the first problem with Angular's Universal is that you go to universal.angular.io and it's a lie. So it's just not actually, you can go through it and the words are there, but they're not true. It says do these things and they don't work. And you go to universal.angular.io, you would expect, but when you go to cli.angular.io, there's a CLI, and that's true, it really is there, you can download it. But at Universal, it's a lie. Then you have to look at other blog posts and tutorials, and they're mostly accurate, actually. You can do better with those, and you can actually learn how to do it. There's some mild things that you have to do. And then that was nice. And then the Angular CLI generated in, I think it was version 1.5, Universal for you. You type ng generate Universal, and then it worked out. So Ksenia got into this little bit of a circle of looking around for information on how to do Angular Universal, assuming it would be straightforward. And in reality, you'll see in a second, it is very straightforward. You just need to know what to do with the version of CLI. So with that in mind, we're on version 1.7 of the CLI. It'll be version 6.0 in a couple of weeks. It's beta now. And I'll show you how to do Universal quickly for 1.7. In preparation for this, I tested it out in 6.0. It failed. So what you see here is really good in 1.7. While it did fail in 6.0, it wasn't all that hard, and it'll be pretty straightforward to update it. The first thing to do is generate a new project. You just start like that with a version 1.7. Next thing to do, go into the project. After that, install your dependencies. Do this generate universal command. Now this is new, so if you've ever looked at Universal and you didn't see this before, you didn't miss something. It's just that they built it. And what it'll do for you is sort of set up your project so you've got a server module and a browser module. And it makes a number of other configurations for you. You make an express server. It's like the same server all the time in the beginning. Make a Webpack config for the server because you're writing your server in TypeScript and you just need a little bit of transpilation. And then you add some scripts to your package JSON, and you serve it, and you're good. All of what's up there is, it's got stuff in it, but that's not really the details that are super exciting about Universal, because they are more or less straightforward as some things in Angular are. As you go into it more in depth, there's great people out there who are showing some of the more advanced use cases. And Angular Air is a great spot for that. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a presentation by this fellow James G, who just went deep into like Universal. It was wicked boring, and then really, really useful. So when you need to use it, it's there for you. And when you don't, you can just sort of make it simple and it gets up and started. I will say a couple things about this last step. We're doing this npm run build SSR and then npm serve SSR. Now that's a little bit of a difference than what you're used to with Angular, because you can just do ng serve and you're sort of building and you're serving all in one and it's constantly updating and it's nice. What you lose in SSR is that reactive feedback to doing it. And that has its drawbacks because it takes a little while to build for SSR. You need to do more work under the hood to make that happen, and it's time consuming. So just a fast thing on it is you can still ng serve your development application and get, without having the SEO benefits that you don't need in dev, the same website. So caveats on Universal, where you just want it to work all the time, it doesn't always, and it has to do a lot with your plugins. Now, one plugin that doesn't work with Angular Universal is called ngx quill, quill.js. Okay. Yeah. Quill.js is like a WYSIWYG editor for the web. It's got a really nice way where when you highlight text, you hit the bold button, makes it bold. It's sort of like the WYSIWYG editor that you might find in a WordPress implementation. Any thoughts on why that wouldn't work with Angular Universal, just off the top of your head? Well, yeah, it interacts with the DOM, and when you're building for Universal, you don't have a DOM. There's no window object in Node. So ngx quill is not configured to deal with that caveat when you're working with Universal. So you got to do some work around, kind of hacky, blah, blah, you don't want like it. So you have to know that when you're getting into it. When you're working with an existing app, you're going to have a little possibility that your particular plugin isn't configured for Universal. It's not the end of the world, but you might find some pain there. All right. Now, transfer state is a little nice thing that's come out for Universal apps. I gotta start up here. When you build out a Universal app, you're doing your like API calls on the server that you're normally doing in the browser. So when you look up those lyrics in your Genius, you've got to pull that from a database, and you don't have static HTML with those lyrics. You got to pull that from a database. When you do that on the server, you're likely doing it in the same way, pulling from the same endpoints, etc. So the server side API call and the browser API call, they're the same, identical. So then you server-side render it, so you do those API calls, you throw it up into your client's browser, they see the lyrics immediately, that's nice. But wait a minute, you've got your client-side code that also makes an API call to get those lyrics and then put them in the browser. All right, well then what's gonna happen there? You make the same call twice. You've done it on the server, now you're doing it again on the client. Look, you just server rendered your page, so it loaded up really fast, and then you're making the API call after you already got the data. So what happens? Is it so bad? No, it's not. It like flickers for half a second, and that's weird. Like, what is it? 10 milliseconds. You got 10 milliseconds in your lives to spare. But you don't want to, right? So transfer state solves that. It's a way of using the Angular communication from the front to the back to say, for these particular API calls that were rendered on the server, don't execute the same call on the client. So you just do the call once on the server, and then you don't do it again until you need it based on user interaction, et cetera, on the client. That's really cool. First thing you do is you put the particular browser transfer state module into the app browser module. You do the same thing in the server module. You import some stuff into your service. That's your API service you're making calls, straightforward. Include it in the service using dependency injection. Here's sort of the magic bit of it. This one here, make state key, and then use the state key. You see in the example, we do the get for the URL. And then if the key exists, so to set the state key the first time, but then above, get the key, and if the key exists, then just return the value of the key, which was set on the state, as an observable. So that's your app sort of behaves without doing a server call, as if the server call was made. Oh, fancy. And again, serve it up, and it won't do that flicker thing. Does anybody have a picture in their head of what I'm talking about looks like? No.
Oh.
Great, great.
But I did have a question on the last slide.
Well, sure. At the end of this, I'm going to have plenty of question answering and comments. So to serve it responsibly and make sure that it all still builds. You follow this process, it will. So, okay. We're hiring, just as of yesterday, we're hiring an Angular engineer. A great reason to work for us is we're two partners are men, two partners are women. As long as you know how to code, we don't care what sex you are while you do it. So NGRX schematics. This part here is the NGRX bit. Everything that we did so far gets us to the point where Genius can server render their lyrics and move on with the rendering of the client-side stuff. And that client-side stuff for them in this case is, it's all this NGRX state stuff. So I've written a lot of NGRX actions in a lot of different applications. And its great benefit is that it's really explicit about what you're doing. It's Janet Jackson at the Super Bowl explicit. Now, when you do that, you have to spend a lot of time on it, and it's not as if you're wasting it. It's kind of linear time that you're doing it in order to grow your application. And unlike when you're using $scope, it doesn't get exponential. It's more logarithmic. Which is to say, if you already know what you're doing and you've gone up that part of the curve, then it's just linear as your app grows, what time you spend on it. Now, if you could just reduce that actual raw linear number from 2 to 1, you're ahead of the game even more. That's what NGRX schematic is about. So as a thought on schematics in general in Angular, every component you generate, every service you generate, every enum you generate, if you're generating enums, is based on a built-in Angular schematic. It's a way of pragmatically manipulating your tree in your application, and you can update files based on it. That's how your generated component is automatically included into your module. And it's been built out and there's a CLI now that every component that gets generated, all those things, are now truly being used in the schematics pattern. Well, Angular is open source, they open source schematics. Now, any of your applications that need to generate stuff can do it. You can write it yourself if you care to for your own applications, and NGRX did it for their own. So that's a perfect use case for a schematic. You've got a lot of boilerplate to do. You've got a fairly repeatable process that you're going through every time you do it. As a matter of course, in the Angular world, people do things the same a lot, and so it's really the perfect storm of utility. Going through what that looks like is pretty, there's a number of steps involved with it. And there's a lot of implicit things that you need to know in order for it to even make a difference. Just to say, if you've never used NGRX, look at it a little bit, check out some videos on Redux, check out some videos on NGRX, and then get into schematics. Because this is not like a starting point. Its main benefit is that it takes into assumption you know what you're doing, and it makes your life easier. So when you don't know what you're doing, it just makes your life it's just one more layer of confusion to add into an already fairly dense topic about how you're operating in your application. So think about when you drive, you don't need to know how the engine works, you just need to know that it works. That's nice. But if you're a car mechanic, you do need to know how that engine works because that's how you make your living. And this is like that. It's like a nice car, and as mechanics, you need to know what we're doing. So install your dependencies. It's NGRX store. You get the store dev tools. You get something called entity and effects. And then as a development dependency, you get schematics. I mean, there's this thing called set. It's a nice way to let the Angular CLI know that you have this new component style things to generate. Now you have to understand you can already generate a component, you know how to do that, and you should generate a component. This allows you to do pretty straightforward ng generate store, and then the other flags that are necessary for it, without having to add an additional flag that tells you which schematic it's coming from. So it's a time saver in a sense. Now look at this here. ng generate store state dash dash root dash dash module at module ts. That's a long. It's not clear exactly what that's doing. I mean, you can read it and know what the words say, but maybe not what they mean. Now, you eventually might, and if you did, you could shorten all that. What I'm showing you here is now the same as before. So ng g st state dash r dash m module component. It's really nice. That one, especially the store ones, st is a good abbreviation. It's not really clear at all what it's doing, though. That anybody even reads that is, well, they're going to be a lot smarter than. So you can go to the NGRX documents before you actually know by heart what these commands are, and they've got them really well listed out and documented. So it is pretty straightforward in the beginning to go look at that, use it as a reference, it's what it's there for, and then until you've got it, the intuitive feel of what you're doing, definitely use it. It's safe, it's nice. So we're now in that world where we've got our universal application and we need to generate some state. And that's what's going to be enabling all the interactions on our website, all the user interactions, all the async stuff, it all goes for state. So we generate this thing called an entity, and an entity encapsulates a reducer, an action, and a model. So you get all that in the one command. You can break them out into 2 or 3 if you care to. And then in addition to that, we'll generate a service, which we'll use to interact with our API, in fact. And you write out the service. It's the same service as you've ever written, where you have a get, and then return the HTTP get, and you're done. You modify the generated action. On this one, when you're using an effect, and you're using an asynchronous effect, what NGRX generates for you is every single action that can ever be done in a typical CRUD application. So that's your get one, get all, load, delete one, delete all, etc. So they don't give you the asynchronous ones, you have to modify it. So you do that so that you do the load, and then you have your effect response, which is in this case load complete. You wire up your app to actually dispatch an action. You just need to, either by user input or pragmatic generation, generate an action in order to work. So in this example, we just throw it into the app component in ng-init. It just happens. You write out the effect. The effect, if you've ever written the effect, it's the same as all the other ones you've ever written. And then you use transfer state in the service. So in the Angular universal part of this, we use transfer state inside of that service to use that make state key, that all important make state key. When you throw it into here, you do the same thing. And when you do it, you have to just use this pipe tap afterwards, after you do the get, to set the state key. And pipe tap is a new RxJS format, but it's the same as doc.do if you did that. And then the last thing to do is toggle the dev tools on for production. We're going to use ng serve. So you can see the dev tools, understand what you just did, worked, and you're good. You just got yourself a server-side rendered application that has NGRX in it, and you're off to the races. Assuming you want to do that at all, assuming that that's really where your world's at. Because when you don't do any of this, you just built an application without any of this, you're still good. I don't mean to say that this is a prescriptive thing that everybody needs to use. It is really just something to know about that's out there in the world as a tool in the toolbox. And what's here is also in a higher than just Angular concept, applicable to other frameworks and worlds. So you can do this in Vue, you can do this in React, and as you might one day need to do, you can do it with, if you have to do Redux without any front-end framework, you can sort of make this work too. So again, yeah, we're hiring. A good reason to work for us is we have a group of people that aren't all engineers. And what I mean by that is our computer science person is doing business development. I mean, he's got his master's in computer science and he just does sales. The person with the business degree does engineering, and then we got somebody who 2 years ago was an accountant and another one who was a marketer. And we all just do coding now. And it's just open to people who aren't from those typical backgrounds. What I have here is totally unreadable on the slides. It's all on our blog. You can go to the blog of software and read through that. There's an in-depth explanation in the technical sense of what the commands do and what they're for, why you need them, and so on. And when you do that, just understand that if you have any questions or kind of points of clarification as you're actually building it, that within those blog posts, there's all the contact information for the team. And it'd be very nice to know what the problems are in order to improve the blog post for everybody and make it more clear what it is you need to do in order to use this stuff in your day-to-day. That's what I've prepared. So now that I've sort of ranted, I will answer any questions. I will take comments about all this, and I'll do it seriously. I'll really give it my all. Thanks.
So I guess way back when you showed one of the first code samples, it was like that the function where you were showing how server-side APIs were made. Yeah, way back. There. So yeah, when you were asking us like, can we build like a mental model of what's going on here? Like for me, it was kind of like hard because I don't have a lot of background in the isomorphic stuff, and I was just curious, like, what this state is in this. Like, what is that? Just like a big immutable object, like the NGRX store, or what's going on in this state? Yeah.
Wow. Who knows? State is not anything to do with NGRX. State is the transfer state service, and to call it transfer state would be semantic. And what's happening here, first in this bit on the server, it runs your HTTP URL, and that's what your component is ultimately calling, if using NGRX or not, in order to fill in your template with the actual data. And then once you get that URL, run a side effect that sets the state key to that data. So it's at this point on the server where you're setting the state key, and then when you're re-rendering it on the client, and the client comes to the same function because the client's still trying to call the API in order to fill in the string, this comes into play, where you're seeing if the state key get returns something, which is to say if the server has set the state key to a value, well then don't do this. In fact, just do this. Forget this return, just return an observable of that data.
So it's kind of a way to transfer like a metallization state from the server to the client. Is that like kind of what's happening?
When you do it this way, you don't do that second call. You just got to cache when it come back.
Okay, and the Angular universal magic kind of keeps track of the transfer states for you. Like, like I'm trying to understand how transfer state is in the application. What's the magic?
Yeah, I don't know.
Me too. Alright, thanks.
The transfer state gets injected into the DLM.
Okay.
So like,
Scripting.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Has anyone considered just putting the entire store into transfer state and just reloading the entire store out on render?
So you got your NGRX, you've got that in the store on the server, now just throw it in. Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Good.
You don't always need it, but it's there when you do. And NGRX has some nice stuff specifically for that. That lets you intercept its whole pipeline and it like emits it with the state of the server. Or if you also had it on local storage, when you reload, it would be there too. It's not just that, it's kind of applicable towards any time you want to do like client-side state configuration. There's certain things that are user preferences that only need to live in the user browser. You might load that into local storage and fix it, the cache will be gone. Things like Beam with a CSS is a good use case.
What's a deployment look like? Like in like a production environment or something? Like obviously now you have two services. Basically, you have server side and your client side being served up. I'm guessing from two different processes. Do you deploy do you have like a production environment? Is that how it works? Do you have like a node server serving up your server side, your SSR code, and a separate node service for Angular?
Yeah. Your server code is able to send over all your client code as a part of it. So if you think of the way that it was loaded from the server, you'd have your standard kind of client-side Angular at the end of your body tag.
Okay.
So the difference now is that your server-side rendered code has those, in Genius's case, pre-rendered lyrics.
Gotcha.
Those all show up immediately. Then it's got the Angular script tag, and then that fires off. So you run the server. And the different part is where you might be able to use like a static server, maybe an S3 bucket for client-side Angular code. Yeah. Now you do have a server with SSR, and you need a real EC2 or another alternative to serve it up.
That kind of leads me into a follow-up, which is like,
okay.
Have you guys heard of any offerings for doing this on Google Cloud Functions in a serverless manner?
Yeah, you can do Cloud Functions. That's what we do.
Oh yeah. And so, is there a way to like configure that from your
Yeah. So David East has a great. If you look on YouTube, David East has some great tutorials specifically for this and explaining to walk step by step. It's basically like you use the host, various hosts that points to the function, and the function basically just runs the universal model.
Thank you.
So if you're developing this, is there a requirement for you to use NGRX state management plus the way you call these functions in order for you to take advantage server-side universal?
So the question is, would NGRX be a prerequisite for server-side rendering? Yeah. When you want to use NGRX and you notice like a need for server rendering, you have an interactive app. You don't always have an interactive app, and maybe a good case for that is just like a blog that has a comment widget. So you have a very limited amount of state there, and so.
Complex app.
Pardon?
It's a complex app.
Yeah. So to have state management, you don't need server-side rendering to do NGRX. You don't need server-side rendering to do NGRX. You don't need NGRX to do server-side rendering. They are independent of each other and independently implementable, and for independent reasons. As soon as you wanted to bring them together, then transfer state is that glue that does it for you. And in just a feeling sense of it, it's really just it's good. It's like in your belly, you like it because you don't have any flicker, and it's also easy. And easy is like, I don't know, people pay so much for easy in their lives, and it's because it just really feels good and makes you smile. When you're coming to the end of this now, I would just say that the final bit would be to just thoughtfully go through it ahead of time, because it's even just to learn it all a tremendous deal. So even to just learn it without having a real need for it might be a stretch, and that's the main goal. Probably it's the thing I tell anybody who I work with or etc. Do you need it? That same friend of mine from React has this great thought, and it's this: all of React is a premature optimization. You probably do a lot of what a lot of people use React for with vanilla JavaScript. The same speech to Angular. So just understand first, do you need it? And the whole world will thank you.
I have one question. You had mentioned at the beginning that the next version 6 coming out for it breaks what you've shown us. So there's is it you said that you didn't think it was going to be significant effort to be able to clean it up. Is there anything that you've seen in the upcoming version that would warrant saying, don't go this route yet, wait till the next version comes out?
Oh, well, there's some thoughts about your own application that come into effect. How stable are you now, and what are your goals? The nice part about 6.0 of the CLI is it uses Webpack 4. There's a nice upgrade there. It does some better things about production mode and development mode. It's a worthwhile upgrade. It's significant. It does have a breaking change here or there, and they're worth going over that hump for in a purely logical sense. And after you've made the kind of character assessment that this is the, you're doing it for the right reasons. You're actually able to do it. It depends on how familiar you are with CLI or how familiar your team is with CLI, what type of switchover cost it would be, and of course, do you enjoy it? Thank you, everybody. Yeah.
Next few minutes to get started.
Thanks. Just go hang out, stay on and off.
Oh no, it's still on. Don't worry about that. Yes, I'm just.
Fair enough.
Yep. That's cool.
Just like you have.
Like that's my question.
Here's my chance to send the attachment for the.
What type of attachment?
Macro.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
you want to show
the whiteboard or just
it should be the HDMI to USB-C.
they might end up bringing this whiteboard.
We're getting the adapter.
Okay. All right, so while they're getting that, can you? All right. Okay, great. All right, while they're getting that, I'll give kind of the preamble type of stuff just to explain what is going on here. So I'm talking to NGConf in a couple weeks, which is great and fun and all that type of stuff. I typically like to do some practice run-throughs. I do not have my full presentation today. Typically for NGConf, it's like 20 minutes, like strict. Like if you don't, if you go like 30 seconds over, they like tackle you and drag you off the stage. So typically, like because there's so much content,
May or may not work.
Okay.
Cross your fingers.
So
I'll keep looking for it.
or alternatively, I mean it's on a Google presentation, so I can.
You got that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did that.
Okay. So typically for like the actual NGConf, like just like with TED Talks, you have to practice it down to like every word, and there's no interaction with the crowd or whatever else. But today I don't want that. So if you guys have questions while we're going through it, I want you to ask them. I want you to bring up if there's any issues, because today isn't about practicing like the actual pomp and circumstance show of like every single word, but more like the content. Like we've been working on this, my partner and I, for like 3 months now. So I want to sort of validate some of the ideas more so than the specific way that I'm presenting it. So I want to make sure that all works really well. And the top, got it? All right, hold on a second. Let me share this out.
Practice for NGConf.
Yeah. Where can I send you a link so you can open it up?
Sure. How crazy is it? Can you could Bitly it? You could email it to me.
Yeah, what's your email?
It's Jonathan JON ATHAN dot. That's me. This guy right there.
And also, oh, actually. And there's another link there. Was it?
It was, yeah. You should probably have audio on.
Oh, was it not recording before?
I don't think it was.
All right,
Sorry.
it's okay. I think Nathan is probably the only one listening.
Yeah.
Okay. So even though if you asked me this like 2 years ago, this is what I was trying to build. I was trying to build one Angular app that sort of runs in all these environments. But since then, for these reasons that I mentioned, like I generally think this is a bad idea. Generally, it's by default, it definitely doesn't have all the features. Like even for building Angular Universal, like there's a lot of stuff there. It allows you to do it. But the reason why I say it's missing features is it doesn't do it by default in terms of if you, for example, when you start building an Angular, Peter mentioned one thing earlier that like it's natural for you to like, when you're building an app, if your mind is just on the web as a platform, to use the window, to use something in the DOM, and then that breaks Universal, right? So like you still have to, even though you're building theoretically this generic app, really you're keeping in the back of your mind the whole time that don't break for these different platforms or whatever, or you have to be careful about it. By default, it's all too often that there are performance issues, and as far as complexity goes, the key thing is just when you have an app that needs to run on many different environments, it's a huge mental overhead when you make changes, because you have to keep all of that in mind. Keep in mind all the different places and all the different consumers of that application, and that's really hard to do. So what should we do instead? So this is like, so this is starting into some of the new way of thinking that like, Nathan and I have iterated on for a while now, and kind of we're trying to formalize in something that not necessarily makes sense for everybody all the time, but the way to think about it is it's another option. And depending on what your app needs and whether it makes sense. But it's something good to have in mind of something that is available. So it starts off, and there's many parts to this, but it starts off with the fact that at the app level, at the actual UI level, like the actual views that you are creating, that you always make those platform specific. You don't try, even though it's possible to build in Angular to create a custom renderer for different views. Like it is possible, and it is kind of a cool thing that it is possible to, like, let's say, build one component with one set of markup, and you can build different renderers to render it in all sorts of different platforms. And that's really cool to do, but don't do that. Generally speaking, it'll work out better if you think about, for your product, the product that you're building, what are the different platforms that are important to you? And again, that changes per product. Some products don't need server rendering. Some products don't need a native app, right? But if you do, you build one small, and that's the key, small app for each platform, and you make it as thin as possible. So it only contains UI, and I'm going to show you examples of this in a second. But it only contains components like the UI. Everything else gets pushed down to a generic set of platform agnostic libraries. So like down at this level, there's no notion of platforms at all. It's just pure JavaScript or Angular services or whatever, however you want to wrap it. But there's no platform specificity at this level. So it's great that Peter's talking about NGRX, because NGRX is a great way to take state and state management out of your UI. And that makes your UI layer much thinner. It sort of enables this to be more efficient, because you're just having the actual, literally just the templates and the event handlers of like how events like actually get into the templates and out. But then all of that state management gets pushed down to this layer, along with interactions with the backend, utilities, all that type of stuff. Now, when you do this, this was our original, Nathan and I, the original thing we thought about. And then when we started to actually work on it, we realized that we need one other thing as well, which is when you do have multiple apps of the same platform. So like in this case, this is just an example where I have two different small apps that both use Angular Universal, so two different server-side apps. Same thing could be with two different web apps or whatever. You typically need a certain amount of shared code that is platform specific. You see this all the time with like iOS. I mean, you know, with let's say iOS, you might build a plugin for iOS that you want to use with every one of your iOS apps. And you might have, with this architecture, you want to not only isolate your apps by platform, but you also want to isolate them by specific functionality. The smaller, the better. And so then you will have multiple apps on a given platform, and you need to have a shared layer for each platform. So each platform has a set of shared libraries. So there's a universal set of shared libraries. There's a native script set of shared libraries, web set of shared libraries, whatever. And then these are the truly agnostic. Like this is the plain old JavaScript, right? So in terms of project setup, this is something where has anyone heard of the Narwhal's NX workspace? Okay, so a couple people. So I'll include or post a link. I don't have it in the presentation right now, but a consulting company, Narwhal, but a bunch of old people who formerly were on the Angular team basically created this whole additional set of libraries to enhance Angular. And one of the best things that, in my opinion, that they created was this concept of what they call NX, which is a workspace that allows for multiple apps. It sort of drives a lot of what we're talking here. It allows you to have many small apps within one repo, within one code base, and how it kind of all works together. So we're basically using that, but enhancing it with, so the NX workspace has the libs concept with all the shared libraries, and it has the apps of like the smaller apps. We're sort of enhancing this by adding this XPlat. So this is an additional folder and set of schematics and other things that we built specifically for this talk and for the libraries that we created for this talk that allow you to create these set of shared platform-specific libraries. So basically everything I've talked about so far are things that when Nathan and I first started talking about this, doing this talk, we had already had some of these ideas in place, but we kind of worked it out. And at a conceptual level, we were talking about it. But then we were like, okay, how can we best explain this to everybody else? And I mean, we only have 20 minutes, and most of the time, people have to look into it later. I mean, we could write a bunch of blog posts, people check in. We'll probably do that as well. But we've always learned the best by building stuff, and I'm sure that's the same thing with you guys. Like, you can read all the things you want, but until you actually build stuff, that's when you really know how something works and all these particular issues and that type of thing. And the more real the app, like, I mean, it's one thing if you create just like a toy app or whatever, which for most presentations, that's like very typical. I do just like some example thing. It's very different when you have like something real that is very complex, full stack, has like an actual use, something that you actually would theoretically, not saying you would, but theoretically build a business off of. So we thought about that for a while, and we came up with an idea. So who knows what this is? Have any of you guys ever seen something like this before? Where have you seen something like this before?
It's a sketch notes.
Yeah.
It's
different places. Yeah, so that's right. So it's a really cool thing that I don't see at every conference and every kind of meetup and that type of thing. But there's this cool thing I've seen at a couple of different conferences afterwards, where you have an artist who is there who is keeping notes, and it's actually good content, but it's also done in a very artistic way that like makes it entertaining. And I've seen this done a number of times where it's like really, really good, and it helps enhance your experience for learning the content and attending the conference and that type of thing. And this is something that like Nathan and I both had seen a bunch of different times, and we thought about it and we realized, what if we basically created an iPad app that allowed an artist, just anybody who we wanted to draw notes, sketch notes, and basically anybody else can just watch them as they're drawing their notes. And so we're like, that sounds like a pretty good idea for an app, and that is basically what we built. It's called sketchpoints.io. It is still going through the iOS review process. By the time ngConf occurs, we're going to have it all out, and that's what we're going to be demoing. In fact, actually, I'm sure maybe some people are listening and this or watch it later, but most of the people who attend ngConf won't know that we built this, and we're actually going to have the guys who are doing the opening comments at the conference. They won't say that Nathan and I built it. They'll just say oh, we have an artist that is going to be doing sketch notes, and go to sketchpoints.io and whatever. But basically, for every single talk during ngConf, our artist that we're bringing is going to do drawings that people can watch during or afterwards or whatever. So we thought that would be actually kind of cool or whatever. And it's been really fun to build. So this is the tech stack that's involved. The interesting thing here is that I honestly have 3 3-hour talks of stuff that I'm not even going to touch in tonight or at ngConf. We're using full stack Firebase for our infrastructure. So someone asked a Firebase question earlier, and we are basically using everything that Firebase has to offer. It's actually kind of interesting. I wanted to do this just as kind of my own exercise, even though I've used the normal real-time database for Firebase. I never used the cloud functions and a bunch of other stuff. But we're using basically everything. And I hadn't used in a real app GraphQL before, so we're using that, and that's been really interesting. We're not going to talk about any of that. If you're interested in this, let me know later. I actually will probably do some talks on this at the Node Meetup at some point. But we're focused more on the top layer, the UI, and kind of how we're building this product on all these different platforms. Now, the app isn't in the App Store. Can't actually give a real demo yet, but I will do a quick thing of the code just to show you guys a little bit of, not on my computer. Okay, change of plans. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to do that.
Can you log into the demo onto the presentation on that machine and then do it on your?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, it's not gonna. So what we'll do is I have one other. Let's do this. I won't have the demo. I will have one other thing I want to show for Universal specifically, and then we'll just do questions or whatever. And
if you present from this machine
and
you log into the stream. That one.
Ah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Smart man.
That's what I thought.
Yes. Good idea. Thank you for that. Hello, hello, hello. Okay. Ah. Yes. Okay. So I'm not gonna be able to demo the app. because it's just in a weird state. And I was trying to get, we were trying to get it pushed to the App Store before this meetup just so tune into the actual NGConf to see that. But I will give like kind of walk through the code base a little bit. And the first thing to note is that this is using something I talked about in when I did the talk at Angular Connect. I talked about the idea of a product monorepo. So who uses monorepos? Anybody? Okay. Oh, a couple people. That's great. So the short, really short version of my Angular Connect talk was that I don't think it makes sense to do what Google does for monorepos, where they put like literally everything for every team of this like 1,000 team, multi-thousand person company in one repo. I mean, that's just insane. And I mean, for them, whatever works. But in my mind, it does work still on a per product basis. So for one particular product, to have everything co-located, there's like a lot of value in that. Makes things like a lot easier, in my opinion. So this is like a product monorepo focus, where the two main things at a high level are back and front end. Like I mentioned, I'm not going to really get into the back end in this talk, but it is by the time of NGConf, I will have everything open sourced, so you guys will be able to like navigate this yourself if you're interested in the GraphQL side of this. But one thing that was just interesting is that I did come up with a pretty, and I'll mention this here just because if you guys are interested, but I'm not probably going to talk about this at NGConf at all. But the interesting thing when you do look at this is that I came up with a way of basically having GraphQL as a pretty thin wrapper around plain JavaScript. So if you guys, when we do send out the link or whatever, you could see that for each entity at the back end, it's a lot of like plain JavaScript functions for the main core services that eventually talk to Firebase or Firestore for the back end. But on top of that, at the GraphQL level, it's like just wrapping that pretty lightly, where like if again, I don't want to get too much into this, but like in GraphQL, they have their own type system. But basically, I have that the GraphQL type defs are pretty much an exact match to the TypeScript typings. Like it's pretty one for one. You do have to do them in two separate files just because they require that you define it a different way. But they're pretty much one for one. And then the service itself is pretty much one for one with the GraphQL resolver, which is how different functions get exposed through the GraphQL server. So that's just a quick note of something interesting on the back end, but I won't really dive too much into that anymore. So for the front end, so basically we have, and we're actually going to add some more apps to this before the conference, but for right now at least, we've got 4 apps. So there's the mobile artist app. So I mentioned that we want to not just split apps by platform, but also split apps by functionality. And so we have a separate app for the actual artist who's doing the drawing than the app that the viewer is actually seeing it. And there's certain components that share, but that's where it goes down to that XPlat layer, like I mentioned. So these are both native script apps, the viewer and the artist. But the viewer app, we wanted to both to showcase it, and because for this product it makes sense, we have the mobile viewer, which is a native script app, and then the web viewer, which is exact like for like. So if you actually dive into here, you'll see that like, sorry. Oops, sorry. So you see like they have a features section here with all the different types of components like underneath here. So these are all native script ones. But if you go into the web app, it'll be the same thing basically. So about home, login, shared. about, or they don't have the about because we didn't add that yet, but basically it's structure-wise, the thing I'm trying to point out is that these are pretty much the same. And the code in here is not, there's not a ton of it. It really comes down to, sorry. Sorry. It really comes down to defining the different components, and everything else is pushed. For some reason, my mouse is doing some crazy things. Okay, sorry about that. Everything else is pushed down to either the XPlat layer, which has like, it's platform specific stuff, right? So for things like talking to Firebase, so the web and NativeScript actually have like different lower level APIs for talking to Firebase. So those are different, like at a lower level. Whereas in the libs are just totally generic common stuff. So these will work on any of the platforms. So like this is a GraphQL library. The model is just like plain JavaScript, right? So like these are all in the common area. It's stuff that can run on any platform. It doesn't have any usually there's no dependencies, which is like the key thing. And universal. So actually, let me hold off on the universal. I might go back to this, but let me go back to the presentation to talk about universal for the specific thing here. So let me look back to. As you could tell, the last part, that was not my response. That's Nathan is doing that part of the presentation, so it's not nearly as refined. But let's get into universal. And when we talk about universal for the stuff that we're talking about, I want to talk about AMP. So who knows what AMP is? Thanks. Excellent. Someone to get a little. All right. The reason why I'm talking about this is because when you're doing universal, theoretically, the reason why you're doing universal is because you care about search ranking. Right? Everybody buys into that? Yes? Okay. AMP is, if you think about the different levels of how you can adhere to search, if you care about search ranking and trying to optimize for SEO, sort of the lowest level where you aren't really doing anything is if you don't really have a server rendered app at all, and you just rely on, technically Google's robot does render your client-side JavaScript. It doesn't rank that well, but it'll render it and index it in some cases, sometimes not. That's sort of like the lowest end. If you server render stuff, that helps. There's different optimizations you could do to like go further along and more and more SEO. SEO is like a whole world of variety of different stuff to game the system, basically. But AMP is like on the way other end. AMP is like the epitome of about as far as you can go in terms of just on-page optimizations for SEO. And it's a spec that Google came up with specifically to help guide apps optimized for, it was supposed to be for mobile, but it helps with desktop as well. And the idea is putting a bunch of restrictions on what your app is rendering so that Google essentially can cache it and serve it up from their edge cache. So there's a couple parts to it. There's a lot of restrictions, like I said, but it allows them to cache it. So No external CSS or JavaScript. It's a server-only view. It's not client at all. No client JavaScript, no client CSS. No custom JavaScript. So even though you like, okay, I'll just throw a bunch of inline JavaScript in there, but you can't do that. You can do inline CSS, but it's restricted. Like it's not too bad. Most CSS it's okay, but there's a couple things that they'll knock you on that are kind of like it's slow, slows down the browser. And then restricted HTML, you can't, instead of doing image tags, you have to do like specific AMP image markup. There's specific markup you need. For all these reasons, like people get pissed that AMP exists because they're essentially making them jump through hoops. But there's a reason why they're doing this. When you do adhere to all these restrictions, it allows Google to basically suck in everything that is to display your view, and they can serve it up instead of your server. And that allows them to guarantee that they can serve it consistently anywhere around the world, instantly, basically. It's like instant rendering for your app, guaranteed, consistently, anywhere in the world, which is pretty significant. But you have to work. You have to work for it. Like this is not most. I would imagine most of your websites do not adhere to these set of restrictions. But basically, I wanted to, as part of this project, as part of Sketchpoints, I wanted to build this, if nothing else, to kind of showcase what is possible. And so, conceptually, what is going on here is you have these kind of libraries building these assets. So Angular obviously, builds for the progressive web app. You're using Angular to build a progressive web app. Universal, instead of the type of thing that Peter was talking about earlier, is there's different ways of using Angular Universal. You can have it as running on your server and re-rendering, so that like at runtime, Angular Universal renders your server view on the fly and serves it up. This is different. This is at build time. So while you're compiling your code, while you're building your code, you generate static HTML that adheres to the AMP spec. So you're deploying out literally static assets, not dynamic content at all. You have your AMP pages out, and when you deploy it out, we deploy it out to sketchpoints.io, but we will, when I show this demonstration, which I will be able to demonstrate this, you'll see that it gets served up by google.com. So the URL, when somebody clicks from a mobile device, when somebody clicks on your search result, it's going to say sketchpoints.io and all that, and it'll say sketchpoints, this for the URL. But when they click on it, it actually goes to this URL, which some people, again, this AMP is kind of a controversial protocol. That's one of the reasons. But the reason why they do that is to guarantee speed and instant loading. And the thing that we do not have working right now, but which we will by ngconf, is that the AMP spec includes a way of lazy loading a progressive web app. So basically the flow is that the AMP page gets loaded, which is server only, no client JavaScript. However, it does allow you to install Service Worker and install your progressive web app. Now that progressive web app doesn't take over the page. It's just there in the background and the user isn't seeing it. But whenever the user interacts with the page, whenever the user clicks on a link, which I'll show that in a second, then the progressive web app will be instantly there. So in that case, then you go from an instantly loaded AMP page to an instantly loaded progressive web app, which is pretty powerful. And then the progressive web app, just in the demonstration, the way that we're going to do it, obviously, like any other web app, you can optionally sort of force your users to install the native app or whatever, which will show a little bit of that. Oh, and the other thing is that actually I'll show this when I bring it up. Yeah. So let me switch again. Actually, this you know what I can show on here. About it. So let me see if this got search indexed. No. Oops. So yeah, part of the thing, I got these out there early just so that Google would index it before the conference. So if you try to do this, like if you on your mobile phones, if you try to do this, it won't work now because I'm on desktop. But if you click on this on your mobile phone, you will go to the AMP page because this is an AMP compliant page. And I mean, even when Google doesn't serve it up, it still instantly loads because it's so heavily optimized. And this is like some garbage text, just because, again, I was trying to get it up there. But the idea is that like this will be a page for the specific talk that it'll show once we have it up there before the conference. It'll have like the view of the actual sketch notes for our talk. But the idea is that this page will be indexed, appear instantly once someone clicks on it from search results. And then there'll be another link here that goes to the actual app where you see in real time them drawing and kind of do the animation and everything like that. Now, this doesn't work for every app for a number of different reasons. Like, but the thing I would advocate for, and one of the things I want to try to get across, and I'm going to think about good ways to kind of convey this, is that right now I feel like most web developers, and especially designers, are stuck in the mindset that the website has to do everything. That when you have like a search result that goes to a page, that that has to be the page that also it's sort of melding with your app. Like so for some apps it makes sense, I guess, for like Twitter, for example. Twitter is search indexed like different pages, but then when you go there, you're interacting with the app right away. But it's not that weird to go to a page that just has content, and then you have to click in order to start interacting with the page. And when you think of, the key in my mind is starting to think about universally server rendered apps and anything on that side as a channel, more so than separating that out from your core app. So your core app is for repeat users and when people are actually interacting with whatever it is that you're building. Your server rendered app is really just for first time people. It's just for when people come there for the very first time. And your whole goal with that is to transition them from search engine results to the core app. That's it. And then they should never come back to there, pretty much. I mean, unless they type it in or whatever else. But for the most part, they should never come back there. So when you think about things that way, so when you think about things that way, it's much easier to envision this idea of not even loading the client side at all, having the AMP page, and just finding ways to entice someone to click and interact with your app and go over. What were you saying?
Yeah. Can I ask, because as someone listening to the talk, this feels like something I want to hear in this moment. What's the advantage of using Angular Universal to build an AMP compliant page?
Yeah.
Versus using any old static HTML static generator? So
it's a really good question.
Yeah.
And in some cases, you don't need it. So I've used this general methodology a lot, and in some cases you don't. I think the key thing in my mind is when you want to re-leverage, like from when you want to re-leverage stuff at this level, mostly when you're building your pages from stuff at the back end or certain logic at your kind of shared level, it makes sense to do that because it's going to be pretty thin anyways. But other times where I've had this as in my situation and other people seen it, where most of the content comes from CMSs and you don't really need to pull that much data from, or it's not you reusing this data as much. Don't use Angular Universal. Like just use your CMS, and just the key thing would be, which you could do this without Universal, is to use in the AMP spec. It has a specific way that's AMP specific. It's not Angular specific. There's a way in which it loads the service worker and the PWA in the background, and you would want to do that. So you load your Angular core app in the background. But otherwise, no, doesn't matter.
Are there caching issues if you're trying to display dynamic content on an AMP page?
Yeah, so another good question. Yeah, so this is an important consideration. So generally speaking, if you have server pages that change a lot, you don't have to have all of your pages as AMP compliant. They could still be heavily optimized, and you just like the AMP compliant. The part of whether you allow Google to cache it, it's on a per page basis. So with our stuff, for those types of pages, we'll still heavily optimize it, and a lot of times we'll still do server only, but we just won't enable the AMP flag so that Google doesn't cache it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's the core of what we're going over. There'll be a lot more demos in a couple weeks, and both the core app and the Universal app, and we're going to demo like the transition, the thing I described as AMP to PWA to native. We'll hopefully be able to demonstrate, as long as Google indexes all of our stuff at a time, which I'm working hard on. Anyways, but that was the core of it. So yeah, there's no other questions. That's all I got. Thanks, I appreciate it. And by the way, if you guys do have, even if you don't have questions, if you have suggestions, like I would really value from everybody in this room, like any suggestions you may have on. Obviously, like I don't care as much about like the format and the way that I was presenting stuff, because I was just kind of doing stuff ad hoc a little bit. But as far as the content and like the specific parts of these things, like things you think is important to highlight or things that weren't as important, definitely email me later. I'd really be interested to hear what you have to say. Thanks a lot. Okay. Have a good night, everyone.